to Coffee with the Commissioner. This is sort of an extension of our Coffee with the County Forester, and we're really excited to have Mike Snyder, Commissioner of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, joining us today. He was appointed as Commissioner in 2010, and before that, he was a County Forester, so he still has that perspective to share with us. So I'm actually going to just turn it over to Mike in a moment and let him share a little bit about himself, what he does, and then we'll take your questions. With that in mind, we ask that you mute yourself so that we don't have the background noise, and that you type your questions into the chat box, and we'll ask questions of Mike that way. Again, Vermont Coverts and VWA are so happy to bring you this program during these strange times. And we hope that you'll continue joining us. We have another one next week with Coffee with a Consulting Forester. So really exciting things to learn and experience. And at this point, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share with us your insights into forests, forestry, and FPR.
Great. Well, thank you, Lisa, and thanks all for the invitation and for joining here. I'm really happy to do it. I am the commissioner, and this is my coffee. So we're off to a good start there. I hope you all have what you need. What Kathleen and Lisa had suggested is that maybe I would start with a little bit of background, both on my own background professionally and a little bit about the department and the role of commissioner. Because although as I scan through here, I'm really thrilled to see a lot of folks that I know and have met, but I am told there are some folks who may not understand or not know those things. So a little bit of background sounds like it's in order. So I'll start there, but I'm eager to just sort of use that to kind of maybe give you some time to think of questions or comments, and also because I'm eager to get to hearing from you. I think it's better when if I'm answering questions, then at least I have a sense that I'm at least trying to address things that are of interest to you, rather than guessing at that and prattling on about things you don't really want to hear. So again, I'm really thrilled for the invite and the chance to do this. We were just chatting a little bit as we were getting started about this whole strange new normal and how the virtual meetings and all, and they certainly have their downsides, and there's no replacement for being together in the woods, for example. But I guess I would say I'm grateful that we can still do this and find a way to kind of be together and communicate, and so we'll be glad for that. So a little bit, I am, as Commissioner of the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, I am a forester. I'm proud to say that. It's something that matters a lot to me. I'm a licensed forester and have been a forester in Vermont for well over 30 years now. And I guess I'd work backwards and say I was appointed by then Governor-elect Shumlin in late of 2010, and served 6 years under Governor Shumlin, and then was thrilled to be reappointed by Governor Scott in 2016, and we're finishing up 4 years with Governor Scott. And I'm honored and thrilled, really, to play the role, to be in this job. I think it's an incredible honor, responsibility, and a real privilege to serve in this role, in this department, with the people that we work with in this state at this time. But at that time, back in 2010, I indeed had been working for, I think it was into my 14th year as county forester in the department, in the forestry division, serving as Chittenden County Forester. And I was super into that job. You all know the county foresters and what we do. I was very happy, very active, working with the landowners in Chittenden County, with some towns, with town forests, and using those as demonstration and research sites, education areas, working with a lot of different schools, and was really into it, as I say. At the same time, I had been working separately but related in the forestry program at UVM, teaching a couple different classes in forestry for well over a decade there at the same time, using the connection of the county forester work with students to give them some connections there. And at that same time, over that long, about 20 years, I was writing the Woodswise column for Northern Woodlands magazine. Doing all of that, at the same time, they're separate, and certainly the UVM job was distinct and not a county forester job, but it was great to be able to make that work over a long period of time. And my point here is that over that time, I was very happy in that job and really had no intention of seeking anything other. And when the transition team for Governor Shumlin called and said, you know, would you be interested in applying? I said, no, thanks. That's great. Maybe someday when my knees go and I can't roam the woods and I'll be like wise, and maybe then I would be really thrilled to have a chance to be commissioner. And they said, well, no, we're asking you now. And anyway, I said no a couple times, and then it really became, they said, well, why don't you just come and have a visit with the incoming secretary and the governor? And I did, and I thought it was just kind of a formality, but then I realized it was really real, and kind of blown away. But after saying no a couple times, I asked for a little bit of time, talked with some of what I would call elders, people that I have a lot of respect for and in my life, professionally and personally, and pretty much every one of them said, you're nuts, you have to do this, what are you thinking? So I did, and honestly, I'm glad I did. I remember telling people who were kind enough to say, congratulations, you're going to be great, this is wonderful. I remember thanking them with a note and saying, well, I know this is going to be good for me. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to be challenged. I like learning. I like challenges. We'll see whether it's good for the department or for Vermont and its forests over time. Time will tell. But those things are true. It was daunting. It was challenging. I barely knew. I'd only been in the State House once on a not even a tour. I barely knew where things were. I didn't know how any of it worked. So it was big and daunting. And 8 months in, we had Irene. That was a major disruption and flooded our offices in Waterbury. We were without offices. It was quite a challenge. And but I would say I have indeed learned a ton, and it's been, again, an honor and a privilege. So that's, you know, I'd just like to make by way of background, a couple other points would be that prior to working with private landowners and municipalities and schools in technical assistance and overseeing the current use program as county forester in Chittenden County, I had spent, that's about 15 years plus a little time with my own small little consulting practice in forest management. But prior to that, I'd spent about 15 years in forest science, principally working after having received a master's degree at UVM in forest ecology, studying sort of the mechanics of acid rain. Why does acid rain damage red spruce trees, for example? That whole program of research, I left that upon receiving my master's degree and was hired by one of the founders of the Hubbard Brook ecosystem study at Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire. That was Herb Borman, a world-famous, world-class forest ecologist at Yale University. He hired me to be a research assistant and kind of become a research program manager for him in his final years. And I spent about 12 years working with Herb and others, first through Yale University at Hubbard Brook, and then at transferring to UVM, the program. And that was really profound. And in working in forest science, particularly in understanding how forests work, this is where I really started to develop the sense that forests are better described as verbs than nouns because of their dynamism and all that they do and their functions. And that really was born out of my time working in Hubbard Brook and understanding how forest ecosystems processes work, particularly nutrient cycling and the effects of human use on forests. Prior to that, I'd basically been in forestry, and at UVM as a student. When I graduated, my first job was in Sweden, working with essentially the Swedish Forest Service, and that was very important and profound in its effect on me and my view of forests and forestry, the very intensive approach, very much a land ethic just built into their culture. These things struck me as very important. I was also working with a saw in the woods, and it was very hard work. And I think that's when I realized, I think I might want to go to grad school. And that's what led to the whole science jag for a while. Anyway, the point here is that as commissioner, where I'll talk a little bit just about what the job is, but to wrap up the background, I look back and I think it's really been interesting, this arc of like 15 years, at that point, about half of my career in forest science, 15 years in forest management, which at its best is implementing forest science, and so 15 years in science, 15 years in management, and now 10 years in forest policy, among other things, where at its best, I believe policy is based on science, grounded in science, and based in science and kind of grounded by the realities of the practical and economic realities of management in the real world. And so I've tried, that was the goal when I left forest science, was a little bit of frustration with publishing papers in scientific peer-reviewed journals, but having a sense that they really didn't inform any management, or landowners weren't accessing this. It was just scientists sharing information, and that frustrated me. So I went headlong back into forest management, hoping to do more transfer of that scientific knowledge and connecting forest managers with scientists. That was something that I think that I did a lot of during my time as county forester, the writing, for example, and speaking, and trying to connect science and make it real, and have it inform and help our approach to stewardship of the land and waters. So that then left me here, and I think it's been a good background for, although I was completely unprepared for managing, I'd really managed in anything but fantasies at that point. So managing a big department of about 140 people with a $28 million operating budget, including a very complex state park system of 55 parks, and over 1 million visitors, and a burgeoning and diversifying demand for outdoor recreation on public lands. That's sort of the suite of activities for our department. We're focused heavily with this group on the forestry division, which is our biggest. And it's, so the department exists as one of 3 departments in the Agency of Natural Resources. It exists in statute with a purpose and a mission and with guidelines, and it says, there's some fundamental enabling legislation that says the forests of Vermont matter, and there should be a department that oversees that and our use of those forests for economic development through forestry, as well as outdoor recreation and managing a state park system. And that is all intended to be appointed. The leader of that manager is appointed by the governor. So I serve at the will of the governor, and oversee a department of state employees that are in the executive branch. Maybe we'll get to some details and nuances that if they interest you through questions, but that's the basic overview. And I guess I would just finish with a focus on the forestry division. The state parks, sort of, it is what it is, and you all know that, and they're wonderful and important. The forestry division, though, it deserves a little bit extra explanation. We have basically the public lands, about 400,000 acres of state forests, state parks, and wildlife management areas that we share responsibility for with the Fish and Wildlife Department. So there's the public lands management of all these places, the stewardship and management through 5 district offices and our incredible staff throughout the state that work in an interdisciplinary way with the other departments of the agency, Fish and Wildlife and Environmental Conservation, to oversee the public lands. And there's a lot that comes with that, from timber programs to forest health, and to the use of those public lands by recreating public and others. We also have a private lands section and program. Keith Thompson heads that up, and that's really the county foresters and outreach, technical assistance, and administration oversight of the county of the current use program. We have the forest health program, which is really important as the kind of, to me, the basis of everything we do. We like to say forest health first. And so this is about monitoring the state and status of the forest health aerial surveys and mapping of defoliation, for example, ground truthing those with forest health plots and measurements of keeping track of insects, disease, all kinds of pests, pathogens, et cetera, that influence forest health. We try to track and understand, monitor, but also be available for providing guidance to landowners and forest managers for how to respond to threats to forest health, whether they're insect, pest, fire, what have you. So the forest health program is really fundamental. If kind of humming along in the background, it provides an awful lot of technical information and guidance, and it's the basis of our understanding of how are we doing with regard to the forests of Vermont and our stewardship of them. We have the Urban and Community Forestry Program, which is a small crew of people that work with communities for green spaces where we live, the streets, street trees and shade trees and park trees, We like to think of the forest continuum from downtown Burlington street trees all the way to the top of Mount Mansfield, and there's a lot. It's hard sometimes to get people's attention about urban and community forestry in such a rural state, but this is an incredibly important program to connect people in their communities and their villages and homes with green spaces and all that green infrastructure does for us. We have the forest marketing, forest sort of products marketing, utilization, and development. A small group of folks who work with wood-using industries and try to support. We track information and guidance, and that's a traditional role that we've played in maintaining relations with those who work in the woods. And so let's see, state lands, private lands, forest health, urban and community, marketing, utilization, and development. We have our wood energy program in there, pushing for advanced modern wood heat as an alternative to fossil fuels-based heating. That's also in that section. I think that pretty well covers the forestry division, and I just wanted to give you a sense of the span of work that we do and how it's done. And I hope with the background that I've provided about myself, the role of the commissioner and overseeing all this, and the job of the department, that sets us up now for a good conversation for the rest of the time that is really based on your questions and input. I hope that makes some sense and is helpful. But Lisa, Kathleen, how are we doing? Turn it over for questions. We have any coming in?
That sounds great. We do have a few coming in, but I'm going to ask one we've asked all of our participants on, just to start it off. Do you have a favorite tree? What is it and why?
Do you all have favorite children? tough answer. Tough question. But yes, so I start with, of course, I love them all. Never seen one I didn't think was amazing. Which is also why I always say in testimony or in speaking, I always stumble over the phrase low-grade wood or poor trees, or junk trees. It's real, we get it. There's a designation there and it means something, but I always cringe because, man, they're all great, and every last one of them. And if you need help in understanding that, I'm happy to help with that. But so with that said, yes, I am, I think, pretty well known for having a deep and abiding passion for yellow birch. It's and we don't have enough time for me to tell you all the reasons why, but it begins with just the beauty of the tree itself, and where it grows, who it grows with. It's very much for me a visual thing about the light that reflects off the yellow birch trees, the light that the bark, the light that comes through the canopy. But again, it's where they tend to grow, their association, that they'll grow a few hundred years if we let them, that they change over time and look very different, that they, you scratch the twig and they smell great, right? Wintergreen. The stilted root pattern that you often see, how they grow over rocks and stumps, and the fact that they are preferentially sought out by forest songbirds as above all other species in gleaning and foraging, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's fascinating. Everything from the sort of rough bark and a lot of surfaces to the way the leaf is offset on the leaf stem, the petiole, and that gives birds a chance to sit and glean. They're pretty amazing trees. I could go on. It's a lot about the woods, but I would also say my kitchen is made from yellow birch wood. It's beautiful. It's durable. It's incredible. I have a lot of respect for it as I heat with wood. I cut wood, and it's very difficult to split. I give it a lot of credit. But it's beautiful, the light of the wood, the way it can be used, its habitat values, its ecological role, its ability to be kind of in a lot of different settings. I'm just amazed by it, and I'm trying to calm down and not carry on. I could go on. I hope that gives you a sense, though. It's for me, it's yellow birch.
Yeah. Betsy notes she had heard that was your favorite, and glad that you're still true to it. So that's a nice comment. We're going to start off with a question from Trevor. He wants to know, in your opinion, what should we do with our ash trees?
We should love them and pay attention to them, admire them, and we should not be rash with our ash, as our folks are happy to say. This is a serious problem. We know, having watched 30 some other states and provinces go before us, with the advent of emerald ash borer, that it's serious and it's really bad. I mean, it kills ash trees, and it is likely to kill most of ours. We still, nonetheless, so let's start there. It's really bad, and there's a very high likelihood, as best we know, that all of our ash species that are all vulnerable, and that it's likely that they'll all be killed to some extent, and that's significant. This is an important part of our forests, with lots of different values and roles in the landscape. And even if that's a high likelihood, we think it makes sense to not be rash, to think of strategies that buy us some time, for one thing, for biological controls and other management scenarios that might help in recovery, and to bank on the possibility of a heritable resistance, a genetic resistance that's heritable, that may, help us over the long term. The point is, I think, is to for now, is to do what we can to keep ash on the landscape. So by all means, those of you who have managed and invested in your woodlands with a timber interest, and that you have ash, that you want to capture its economic value, you should be doing that, and probably considering different ways, like maybe taking some larger trees before you would otherwise have if you had a timber sale planned. Sure, expanding the amount of ash that you're cutting makes a certain amount of sense. We would ask, while you do that, just no need to take all the ash just yet, particularly keeping some ash in different size classes. I'm keen on the possibility for keep seeing these big ash seed years and pulses of ash regeneration. Love to see where that goes. I'm more optimistic than many. I don't think I have my head in the sand. I just think we want to help landowners consider options, not be too, well, again, rash, don't rush into things, and look for ways to kind of keep ash on the landscape as long as we can across a variety of size classes and different site situations. But that said, in certain places, it does make sense, given the fact that these trees die quickly and then they become very brittle, they become dangerous and tricky to take down. So in built environments, street trees, and we know many planted trees have been ash in that context over the years. So it does make some sense to have this sort of preemptive strategy for removing ash, or hoping that people are doing that. They're thinking about replacement trees of other species, et cetera. So it's a mixture. How we treat the ash is, I would say, to bring it all around, would be to treat the ash thoughtfully, and without a one size fits all, other than let's be thoughtful, let's keep options alive, and let's at least buy some time and see if we can capitalize on some of this hopefulness that does exist. We'd love to see ash remain, because it is an important species, ecologically, economically, and culturally. Remember, for Native peoples, this is a particularly important tree. So there's a cultural, historical value. They are ecologically very valuable for habitat. Think of all the ash that grows in riparian areas, particularly green ash species. They play these roles, as well as being, at 7 or 8% of our stocking in the state, and a very beautiful, durable, practical kind of wood. It also has real economic value. When you put all that together, it's worth paying attention, being thoughtful, and keeping ash as long as we can.
Great, thank you. Sabina wants to know, she lives in Jericho and walks the UVM research forest, and she wants to know if you have an idea or an overview of what that program is doing, and maybe some updates on current research that's going on or information that's coming out of there.
What a wonderful place. I'm happy to be reminded of the Jericho Research Forest. For those of us many of us who went through the forestry program at UVM over many years, that was a really key hub of our education. We all have fond memories of summer camp back in my day. That was an extended summer coursework of field work, principally at Jericho, as we would call it. So it's a much beloved place, incredible history, ecologically, and the role of the forests out there and different research that's been done. To be honest, that said, I am not able to give a real great update. I know there's new life and new work being done out there through professors like Bill Keaton and Tony D'Amato in kind of a resurgence of use of the place beyond it as a teaching place, but also as a research facility. And that's really wonderful to see. I know just generations of students of all types, not just forestry students, have used the place, learned from it, and whereas there were plantations and research back in the day that was somewhat defunct, I would say, almost for a long time in the research side, but has more recently seen a renaissance of that kind of work out there, which is great. But I'd have to defer to people like Bill and Tony and others at UVM for a better update on the research that's going on now.
We'll have to put them on for a future coffee
That's
series. Trevor wants to know if you see any threat to UVA this year.
UVA being the Use Value Appraisal program, also known as current use. Some people call it land use. I don't know of any particular threat to it. I think that it being a massively important program, remember 2 million acres now, over 2 million acres of forest land enrolled, almost 16,000 parcels, landowners, more and more folks, I think, referring to it as the most important, the most successful forest conservation program in our state's history. It's profoundly important. That said, it also has, it's big and there's a cost to it, to the state. When I'm in, say, the Ways and Means Committee in the House and they're talking about tax programs and they're talking about, boy, Commissioner, this costs some $60 million to operate this program, I always pause and say, that's fair. Let's talk about those costs. But if we're going to do that, it's also fair to talk about the benefits. We have to do both. And the benefits of this program are massive and mostly taken for granted. So my point here, Lisa, is that it's always a kind of a target, if not under threat, because it's big, it's comprehensive, it takes a lot. And when money's short, it's a place to look. But I know of no threats. I think it's, in my opinion, over the last 10 years as I've been in this role, I think with some significant work for the Current Use Tax Coalition, all kinds of participants, the Forest Roundtable, there have been some changes in the current use program, real significant ones about how the penalties apply, the extent of the penalty, this sort of thing. We added the ecologically significant treatment areas to allow non-timber objectives in certain qualifying places for certain reasons. Through those efforts, I believe we have kind of moved the needle on the understanding of the importance and the value of the program. And I think it's better understood and more valued than ever before, even if it'll always be on the list of things. Should we look at that? Should we tweak it? And of course, there are folks out there, to be fair, who see it as, I don't know, some sort of white collar welfare and that people abuse it. And so it is under attack, if not threat, at least in some quarters. And I think it's worth, given the importance of it, I think it's always worth paying attention.
Great, thank you. Sabine had a question about tree wardens. She wants to know if there is an update on the tree warden guidelines.
Yes, I'm glad to speak to this. This is legislation that we proposed a few years ago, was to modify and modernize the tree warden statutes that were established in, I think, if I'm remembering now, 1904. That's 1904, and really haven't had any updates since. Whereas many other statutes that relate, say, highway statutes and other local statutes relating to local government have changed. And so what we found was, over all that time, these antiquated statutes are in conflict with other statutes. They lack clarity. They lacked, particularly about definitions, about roles and rights and responsibilities. And that's because what we're talking about here is they're talking about trees that are your trees, private landowners' trees that are in the right-of-way of a municipality, a highway right-of-way. So that means they're your trees, but the town has some say over them through the tree warden. And it was unclear what say, to what extent, when, and where. And this was causing real conflicts. There's a famous case in Addison County right now in litigation where a farmer cleared a tree line, a hedgerow, that happened to be in the right-of-way, and it spanned 2 towns, whereas one town said no problem, the other town said we have a big problem, and according to these statutes, you owe us over $1 million. And so they're in litigation now, and that seems nuts. And so that's because of the antiquated statutes. So we proposed a couple of years ago changing those statutes to clarify and resolve these issues of definitions, rights, responsibilities, roles for the landowner, the tree warden, the highway people, etc. And it was complicated. It turned out it was so complicated that I pulled the bill. The committee was kind of wrapped around the axle. And what I learned was when you're talking about private rights and public interest and their overlap, it's complicated. And we needed to do a better job of prepping for this and helping everybody come to the table and understand what we're trying to do, and importantly, what we're not trying to do. So we regrouped, we met with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, we talked more and more with the tree wardens that exist, and we came back this winter with a proposal. And in the House Ag and Forestry Committee, they did great work taking it up. Our first proposal as introduced was pretty ambitious, and it included, I'd say, more than just clarifications. It went towards advocacy for the importance of green spaces in these shared rights of way. And that triggered a lot of confusion and more questions. And I'm very, very proud of what happened. We all worked, our people, particularly Danny Fitzko as director and the former program manager for urban and community forestry, where this sort of lies, was wonderful. And with Elise Shedler, our program manager now, and Sam Lincoln, deputy, we put a team together and really thought about how to respond. And we just kind of adapted this through the session, through January, February, and March. The short of it is, we reached an agreement that the committee was very happy with, that the League of Cities and Towns would support, that kind of backed away from some of it, but still with the basic goal and effect of clarifying the roles and responsibilities. I'm thrilled to tell you that passed the House, out of the House Committee of Jurisdiction, 11-0, a unanimous vote with all that support. It then moved through and it passed through the full House. So the bill, which is bill number I'm actually forgetting right now, I'm sorry, it passed the House. And Speaker Johnson told me, and it was a very, very powerful vote. It was there's a dozen or two votes against and 150 some votes or 130 some votes for. So it was favorably moved, and then the COVID thing happened. And so it's passed out of the House. Speaker Johnson tells me that she included it on a list to the Senate president, a list of things that were priorities for the House that they would ask the Senate to finish. And so they didn't finish it yet. They haven't taken it up. I've spoken with Senate leadership. It's been referred to the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. And my hope is when they reconvene in August, in late August and into September, that this will be a bill they'll take up. I've asked them to be in touch, tell us what we need, and my hope is we can get it through that committee and then through the full Senate and to the governor for signature. So it's halfway through, and with hope, with luck, the Senate will take it up in this strange altered session. Because if we don't get it done, then that means it's a new biennium come January, and everything's erased, and we have to start completely from scratch. And as I said, this has been a few years and a lot of work. It's important, and we really hope that we can get this good work that so many people came together on. We want to see that get done.
Great, thank you for that update. That was awesome.
I'm guessing there's at least one question in here for which I'll have a short answer. How's that?
All right, we'll see. Well, we just have to have you back, so that's not a big deal either, as long as we can fit in your schedule. We have a question from Harris. Now, I don't know if you know, but we had Ali Kosiba on this conversation, and she's the new climate forester on your department. And he asked her this question, but he wants you to answer it as well. Do you see management prescriptions relating to climate that would be approved in a current use plan that wouldn't have been approved maybe a few years ago? Yes.
There, I did it.
A short answer. I like it.
And I think it's worth talking more about. I'd love to hear Harris's thoughts if they're assuming he has like particular ideas. Yes, this is the idea of adaptive approaches. And one of the first things I did when I became commissioner way back when was ask a team of our folks to gather and say, let's look at our current approach to forest management, silviculture, our silvicultural approaches. And at the same time, look at the literature that's emerging on adaptive silviculture with climate change in mind. And then see where the gaps are and what other possibilities, and create kind of a guide for us for adaptive silviculture. And they produced a fantastic document back in, I don't know, 2012 maybe, that was kind of a guide for adaptive silviculture and in Vermont. And it's really informed our thinking, and that was the start of thinking differently about what can we do to think about resilience and all these things that are associated with climate change, everything from changing in the timing of bud break and flowering, these sort of biological, ecological changes in response, species composition shifts responding to climate change, as well as the kind of operational challenges and changes that we have to contemplate based on new hydrology, flooding, serious wind events, icing. Like there's like practical operations related stuff. There's ecological changes, biological changes, all of which inform our approach to management and silviculture in particular. So we've been trying to develop that nimble approach to thinking differently. And I think ultimately, though doesn't exist now, that's probably something to do in the current use standards for what would we accept, as Harris asks. Is there what changes, modified approaches? I think we need to be ready to accept modified approaches where they make sense and a case can be made. Just like now, a forester consultant comes on behalf of a landowner and says, this is what the stand is made up of, this is what it's doing, its history. In other words, the conditions that exist, here's the landowner's objectives, and here's my plan for connecting those things, right? That's silviculture, that's the role of the forester. And they come and they say, I'm gonna make a case that this is a little different. And as long as they make that case, and the county forester is something they can hang their hat on, is by way of measuring and doing that public accountability that you did what you said we were gonna do, you did it well, and it's the right thing to do. I think we have a way forward, and we need to together kind of have the communications about that and build the system that allows for adaptive approaches to climate change. Absolutely have to do it. We're learning more and more with the likes of Bill Keaton and Tony D'Amato and other researchers helping us. We're learning a lot. We need to apply that new thinking and get out of the same old, same old.
That was not a short answer, but it was a good answer. Thank you. Catherine wants to know, and I'm going to actually hold off while I read a second question. She wants to know, what challenges has COVID presented for you? And then John wants to know, considering he's getting a little bit into the Black Lives Matter issues, considering 400 years of white folks oppressing people of color in North America, do you see a role for our forests and forest communities in helping resolve racial inequalities? Considering the coronavirus pandemic, do you see a role in forests and forestry in Vermont's economic future? So it's all kind of COVID related.
Okay, well, so COVID, the impacts are severe, just like they are for many, and I won't pretend to cover them all. There's certainly the personal effects on our lives, but speaking on behalf of the department, it's had a real impact, as we've had the emergency declaration and the work from home, and our folks were asked early on to be models of this, and it was a real challenge because we have people who really are dedicated to their work, and all they wanted to do was get going. It was spring, it was coming, it's time to get back out and work with landowners and foresters and others. And so they were like caged animals, it seemed to me, when we told them, nope, you have to work from home and you have to learn this new telecommuting and virtual meetings, when all they want to do is get in the woods and be with people. And so it's been an adjustment. They've done an amazing job of doing so and being creative, like these forums, to find ways to stay connected and help continue to teach and engage and listen to people. So real challenges, but I'm really proud of what folks have done to do little videos in their own personal woods to continue to try to share information. And we've adjusted the way we changed kind of made it more possible to allow for extensions and delays in treatment applications. And we've kind of made modifications. And I think we've done a pretty good job being responsive. The challenges are sort of practical in how we work and all. Beyond that, the challenges are about the economics. That this is a massive impact, and whereas forestry, logging, and certain activities that develop certain forest products were early on deemed as essential, which was great because at first they weren't, and Sam and I really advocated basically over a few days to say, no, we missed something here. We got to have this. So we got it deemed as essential. And I think that's really important. If nothing else, just sort of optically and like establishing culturally that, yes, this is an essential part of life. Not to mention the packaging and the medical supplies and the energy wood that was being used at the time in support of the response. It was great to document that it was essential, but that didn't mean that everyone could go to work, or that even businesses that were allowed to keep working could keep working because of disruptions elsewhere in their supply chains and their personnel and costs of trying to do it well and safely. So massive disruptions economically in a forest economy that was already had major threats from globalization, the loss of the low-grade markets in Maine, workers' compensation costs, the things that we've been talking about for a long time, the challenges that threaten the continuation and the modernization of our forest economy. They were already there, and they're made worse by this situation. So COVID has had a significant impact on us logistically, practically as a department and functioning, but also in terms of our purview and the work that we do and our mission, particularly on the forest side. That said, and we don't know where this is all going, and we're pretty concerned. That said, early on I pivoted to, you know what, forests once again are going to be the answer. And forestry is going to be a big piece of this. So we see an opportunity, particularly for public lands, possibly for private lands, in playing a role in an immediate economic recovery by putting people to work and investing in public lands and investing in say, timber stand improvement, invasive species control, water quality protections, habitat enhancements, recreational infrastructure and access improvements. These are things that can help put people to work in an economic recovery now and in the short term over the next year or so, but with the long-term benefit of being investments in our forest and recreational economies, which I would argue are among our best hopes for a viable, vibrant, and prosperous Vermont, and that we need to pay attention to. So we like to see forests, forestry, and all that it provides as being part of the solution to this crisis. And that gets me to the last piece, which is the cultural piece. Once again, forests as places to come together, to learn, to be with each other, to be outdoors, to be healthy, to connect with nature. Those are all important. And we have a responsibility to try to make forests, yours and ours together, available to everybody, and to deal with the limitations on access and the equity disadvantages. We need to be thoughtful about how we can play a role, a productive, healthy, and happy role in humans coming together. Remember, forestry, to me, is the peaceful, productive coexistence of people and forests. And I'm all for wilderness and leaving places alone, and we need that, but I'm way more for, and I think we need way more of, people thoughtfully, intelligently, and productively coexisting with forests in a way that works for both people and forests. We ask a lot of our forests. They don't really need much from us. We need them. And I think it's an incredible opportunity for us to play a role in diversity, equity, inclusion, justice for all people, to be really thoughtful about our being welcoming and truly equitable in access and opportunity for everybody. And I just think there's real opportunity here to bring all this together. And once again, your forests, public forests, being part of the answer, which is really hopeful and energizing in a strange and difficult time.
Thank you. Alan had a question. We had Ethan Tapper on talking about old growth forests and their importance. And carbon sequestration has become, part of that conversation about old forests. And he's curious what your thinking is about promoting the development of older forests on state lands and on private lands.
I'm all for it. All we just need is time, right? On the one hand, to be old, you have to live a long time. And our forests are kind of middle-aged, maybe, I like to say late adolescent, because I like to think of forests as having the capacity, most of our communities being able to go a few hundred years, and they're really not even close. So we need time, and we need to allow them to develop, right, to be old. And we ought to be, I think we ought to be thoughtful about, and we, in fact, in the current use program, we're thinking of ways to tweak the standards in the old growth ESTA category to allow different things to happen. Okay, so that's a start. But at the same time, I'm very excited by, again, these new adaptive approaches to silviculture that are about enhancing the old growth, the old forest characteristics, if you will, of forests, the complexity in particular, the structural complexity of forests. Old forests have that in spades. Young, homogeneous forests don't. So there are ways to think about the timber harvest and silvicultural approaches that enhance that and sort of accelerate the development of characteristics of old growth forests, even if they're not particularly old. That's super exciting. I think we're seeing people do it more and more. And I think that's the direction we're heading in this combined way of thinking about being patient, allowing and valuing the development of old forests, but also working actively in these sort of homogeneous stem exclusion stage. That's a little wonky forest silvicultural term, where the canopy's closed and you don't have much going on in the understory. By making some canopy disruptions and stimulating new cohorts of age classes and species mixes, we can diversify and complexify forests in a way that reflects some of the better attributes of old forests, even when they're not all that old yet. And I think we want to do both. Allow patience, allow some room for development of old forests. When we find areas that are closer than others to old forests, we want to be also thoughtful about protecting those and using those, expanding those. But then this other idea of what can we do to mimic, if you will, the attributes, the qualities, and the benefits of old forests in forests that aren't even that old yet. Hope that's helpful.
I think so. Marky wants to know, should we be concerned about burning wood? I mean, is it harmful to the environment? What's the thoughts on burning wood?
It's a great question. It's one that needs a lot of attention, because it doesn't lend itself well to simple, easy sound bites. It requires people leaning in, paying just a little extra attention. So burning wood, it depends on how we burn it. And so if you just burn wood wastefully and poorly, that would mean we're not making good use of the heat, like it's lost and wasted and inefficient. In other words, inefficient use of our trees. That makes no sense. Or if it's dirty, meaning just dumping wood smoke and particulates and other materials into the atmosphere. That's dumb. But the good news is we don't just pile wood up out back and burn it and hope to get warmed by it. We actually have technology. We have wood stoves, and we have wood burning, other wood burning devices, pellet stoves, and then boilers for central heating, district heating at these various scales. So a wood stove in my basement, a central heating system in a multi-family house, boilers in schools, right? So and when we do that, now it is very doable. We have the technology, more and more people are using it, and this is what we're trying to push, is this idea of modern or advanced wood heating. That is efficient use of the trees, highly efficient capture of the energy in the trees without wasting, and clean burning with respect to the atmosphere. So that's modern wood heating, and we believe that we have significant goals for increasing the proportion of Vermont's heating budget that is met by local wood in this automated, modern, clean, efficient way. We're at about 20% of our thermal load is met by your trees. Right now, we want to get to about 35%, because that is a really smart alternative to burning dead dinosaurs, which is also dirty, and more importantly, it doesn't do anything for forest stewardship, for forest landowners. 80-some cents on the dollar spent on fossil fuel heating leaves the state. The inverse is true. 80-some cents or more on the dollar stays in the state when we use local wood. So we want to build the infrastructure for burning wood locally in this modern, efficient way. So if we do it right, it's really smart, and it's part of the solution to climate change, to local jobs, and to keeping forests. It's win-win-win. If you do it wrong, it's really dumb. It's wasteful, it's dirty, and there's no future in it.
All right. We're going to jump back to EAB for a minute. Jeff wants to know, there's two questions, so give me a moment. Has EAB been found in Chittenden County yet? And then Bonnie followed up with, when all the ash trees are gone, what will the ash borer attack? Something else?
We've got a sighting is in Chittenden County I know in Grandisle. Was there one in Milton? I'm gapping right now, and maybe if one of our staff is on the line, I think there are a few. If anyone knows, I know in Addison County there's a find. I know near county. Was there one in Milton? Am I remembering? But so it's real close, but I'm not sure there is definitely a positive find in Chittenden County yet. One of our wonderful staff or someone can correct me. I'm sorry that that I've just sort of gapped that last one. What does the insect do after they're gone? Well, remember, we're trying to keep ash trees on the landscape one form or another. So my hope is that we'll come to that. And but my understanding is they're pretty particular to these ash species, and that jumping to other species, I don't know if that's been seen elsewhere yet. So my hope would be that maybe it just goes away and it eats itself out of house and home and is reduced. I'm not quite sure beyond that.
Okay. Jeff wants to know, he thinks he found several mature elm trees on his property. Could these be resilient strains?
They could be. I think the best understanding is, and great for that, wonderful trees, right? I think the understanding is that it's not so much resistance, it's more like a geographic happenstance. Remember, this is a fungus. The Dutch elm disease is a vascular disease caused by a fungus that is vectored by a beetle. And if the insect can't find trees to when it's laying eggs and carrying the fungal spores, then it can't transmit it. And I think that's one sort of vestige of the decimation, is that they're so scattered that it takes a little while for a tree to be found and infected by the vectoring insect. And so my guess is these are individual trees far from a known infestation and infection, and they've just sort of escaped infection. Possibly some level of resistance, but my understanding is it's not so much. There hasn't been a lot of that found, and that's why the back crossing and the development of kind of a new, almost completely American elm species is much like what's being done with chestnut is the approach, as opposed to breeding gardens that develop resistant strains. It's a more because there hasn't been anything really to work with. That's my understanding.
All right. John has a great question. I'm kind of excited for this one. From your vantage point, what are the top 3 things woodland landowners should be aware of, get more knowledge about, and/or take action on in the next 1 to 4 years?
Call your county forester, get to know your woods, have a plan, have a succession plan. Get to know your woods. I think I'm preaching to the choir here with this group, but it's really understand what you have. Too many folks are accidental owners. They got the land, came with the house, and get to know it. And because my belief is every time that's ever happened, better things have resulted. People get connected, they understand, they are committed, and that's the best thing you can do. Most of you are already there. So what beyond that? Again, stay in touch. There's a lot of good, guidance and advice. We're here to help. And I think, taking stock, having a plan, valuing it, having a professional relationship if you need it with a forester, and in particular, this long-term plan for the succession of ownership. And we have resources and guides. We know that's a factor for many owners. And we want to be able to help people with that. So those would be things to take advantage of, and just learn. And I think I'd like to say, make it your thing. Learn about what you want to learn about, and not necessarily what we tell you to learn about. And we're here to meet you where you are. What do you like? What do you care about? And forests are incredibly diverse, complex. There's a lot to love out there, and you get to have your choice. And we'd like to help you find that magic. I think there's a sort of a soft answer, but there's just a big audience. And I think it varies depending on who you are. It's mostly about knowledge, understanding, connections, networking, and know that there's support to tap into, and that your private forests are providing enormous public good. And we all have to understand that. And you should be proud, and we need to support you, because we're dependent on it in a state like Vermont, where 80% of this great forest land is privately owned by families and individuals like yourselves.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more quick question. Catherine wants to know if you can address what might be underway to support and advance agroforestry so that forests aren't just about cutting trees, for example, growing mushrooms.
Well, that's wonderful. Forests, particularly the sentiment that forests are more than just cutting trees, that's already true. And forestry, short of agroforestry, that's forestry. It's way more than just cutting trees. There's a lot to do and a lot to benefit from. That said, the idea of agroforestry is great. It's no surprise to me. It's growing. There are folks, we have some engagement with our partners at agriculture and at UVM Extension, and there are folks doing research and actively pushing it. And I think it's wonderful. It's no surprise to me, because to me, what this means is, oh, forests are going to do even more cool things for us. And now, so the idea that we have cows benefiting from trees, that doesn't surprise any of us. I'm not a farmer, great reverence for farming, but it doesn't surprise me one bit that a pasture would be better if it had trees in it, at least some, right? That's what I'm hearing, is that you have silvopastures, pasturing in the woods. And so it's no surprise that agriculture would look to the woods to benefit in many ways, including new products, sort of agricultural food products like growing mushrooms. So that can happen, and mushroom growing, cultivation, wild and cultivated mushrooms can happen in a strict forestry context. It doesn't have to be agroforestry, but as a component of a more robust approach to using the woods in a farming operation, there are many, many, many more things to do. I think I want to be clear, and I've made this clear to our partners in agriculture. I'm a little bit worried. I think there's a line to be drawn, that a decision and a choice has to be made, and it's your choice to make as a landowner. And that is, I'd say simply that wooded pasture makes a lot of sense to me. Pastured woods makes no sense to me. So decide which you want. So the woods are better without cows and sheep and goats in them, generally speaking, that if you want them to be woods. Sugar maple, for example, is famously shallow rooted. Hooves do a real bit of damage on those fine roots. That's very important to tree health, to tree value, etc. So my point here is not to be strident or stay out of the woods. I'm saying make an intelligent choice and understand that when you put cows in the woods, it's probably really good for the cows, but it's not that great for the woods, which is okay if it's your choice. But don't expect the woods to be fully functional if you do that. And so to me, it's really just being intentional about saying, okay, I've got some pasture. I'm going to expand into my woods here. That's your choice. And it's a wonderful thing to do, because I think it's probably better agriculture. But it's a bit of a risk for forest health. And that's well documented. So I'm not saying no. I'm just saying be thoughtful, be aware, and what we're getting into. But again, no surprise that by adding more elements and dimensions of the forest into the farm, that the farm would be better. That makes good sense to me. It's going the other way that I think we just want to be thoughtful about and careful. I hope that makes some sense. And that's one fact why in current use forestry, we don't allow cows in the woods. If you do, you can convert it to agriculture. But we ask people to fence the cows out of the woods because of their impact on roots, regeneration, erosion, etc. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm trying to balance this. It's great, but it has its limits. And it is an emerging area with lots more technical assistance available to guide landowners, particularly in the area of like growing mushrooms. And we'd encourage people to do that now. We have forest landowners now cultivating ginseng, a variety of edible mushrooms, selling them into local restaurants, foraging for fiddleheads and nuts and the like. That's all happening, and that's wonderful. We see that as a big part of forestry, or potentially growing.
I think it's funny, you know, when we do the coverage training and we're out in the foresters and the biologists, and it's often a landowner will ask a question and the answer is, it depends. And like you said, it depends on your goals and objectives as a landowner, and it depends on where your property is and what your property has to offer and all those kinds of things. So I think it's a great way to finish. There is one thing I do want to finish on. There was a question from Marky about, can you recommend a good book about forests? So I want to point out that Michael has Woods Wise, which is a wonderful book. It's a compilation of his essays that were written for Northern Woodlands magazine. Each is only about 2 to 3 pages. I think it's 750 words or somewhere around there. And it's a wonderful read. I do know VWA has it for sale on their website. Kathleen, if you want to tell a little bit more about that in a second. I would like to finish before I turn it over to Kathleen, thanking Mike for joining us today. Perhaps we'll have him again in the future there's a few questions we didn't get to. We'll be able to get to those maybe sometime in the future. And for all of you out there, thank you for joining us. Join our e-news for both VWA and Covered so you can learn about this. I know Kathleen's going to tell you about a succession planning workshop they have coming up. We have Coffee with a Consulting Forester next Friday. So lots of good things coming up. And if she can't find it right now, it's okay because it's going to be in the e-news. So sign up for that. Kathleen, if you want to say anything, and Mike, if you want to add any extra words after that, we would love it. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much. So glad you were all with us. And Michael, I can't thank you enough. We are so fortunate to have you in your position of leadership, you know, guiding forestry in the state of Vermont. And we're so fortunate to have you so accessible. I mean, that's an amazing thing. I think we don't always appreciate that we have such easy access to people like you and all who make important decisions for the future of our forests. So
very, very kind. I appreciate that. And as I said, I'm honored to be in this role, thrilled to still be at it. And you know, I just want to finish with a nod to you all that you're here. It speaks volumes that you even would sign up to do this. What you represent as landowners and your interests, and Vermont Covered, so VWA, what you do is so important. So I want to thank you all. And comments, I actually actively long ago set about to be the most accessible commissioner in state government. So I appreciate you reflecting that back. And I would be happy to come back and do it again if you like. There's so much more to talk about. But appreciate all those kind words and the plug for the book. It's wonderful. It's yes, please go find it. It was a thrill to create it over a long period of time, and real satisfying to see it out there and people enjoying it. I love hearing people's reactions. So, and maybe we can keep adding to the list of questions for Woods Wise Volume 2. Maybe we'll get to that next. So once again, thank you, appreciate it, and really just want to finish with thanks to you all. What we're doing is just reflecting the values of your lands and your interests, and we're all in.
Oh no, I think I lost my connection.
No, I think Mike did, Kathleen.
Oh, Mike did. Okay.
All right, so that's a great place to end it, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
That was just a glitch. I didn't mean to leave.
So can I, yeah, before we go, Lisa, I just want to mention the Legacy Planning Workshop that is on Tuesday, July 14th. It's from 7 to 8 p.m. Mike mentioned how important it is to think about the future of your forest land. We are fortunate to have a couple of experts in legacy planning who are doing webinars for us, supported by Vermont Housing and Conservation Board's forest, oh my gosh, I'm losing the words. Viability. There we go. Forest viability program. So if you check vermontwoodlands.org, you'll find that webinar information. Sign up for our e-news. As Lisa mentioned, we have Mike's book for sale as well. So vermontwoodlands.org. And thanks all for being here.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone.